There were no water levels in Gangplank Galleon Ahoy, which might seem like a missed opportunity being a world themed around a pirate ship and all, but when you reach Kremlantis, it all makes sense. Kremlantis is the second world of Donkey Kong Land, and is essentially all the game's water levels packed into one area. Like Gangplank Galleon, Kremlantis offers a ton of new and interesting ideas into a relatively short amount of time. And similar to the differences between Congo Jungle and Monkey Mines, compared to Gangplank Galleon, Kremlantis definitely starts to get a bit weird. It's also, in my humble opinion, the most interesting area in the entire game. This is part 2 of Overthinking Donkey Kong Land. To be fair, as much as I love this game, that's not a very high bar. Worlds 1 and 3 feel quite disjointed, so it's really between Kremlantis and the final world, Big Ape City. Kremlantis to me beats out Big Ape City because it fits into the world established in DKC much more cohesively, and for some reason, that's something I actually care about. I've got a bit more to say on that, but first, let's check out the overworld. Let's start at the beginning. At the center of the map is a temple that vaguely resembles a pyramid. One small detail I really appreciate is how the 3 non-water levels all take place in this temple. There are plenty of other structures around the map, but the designers took the time to keep that detail consistent. What that says to me is that this central temple could be the only structure in the entire underwater city where there's air. There's what appears to be Greek, Mesoamerican, Egyptian, and Morrowind influence in the architecture of Kremlantis. And the way these grand structures seem to sit in the seabed without anything between them makes me think that possibly the real city is buried deep beneath the sand, and the ruins we see here are just the tops of their tallest structures. The most interesting thing on the map is the giant Clambo in the corner. This could be a statue, or it could be the boss, known simply as Giant Clam. Based on the size, I feel like it's more likely a statue, but I think the intention was that it is the boss. That makes more sense too, as I can't imagine the Kremlings building statues of anything except themselves. Also, I love how it's literally just the Clambo render from DKC slapped over the image. Unlike pretty much every other world in this game, Kremlantis might actually tell us quite a bit about the world of Donkey Kong. As we've discussed in the Overthinking Donkey Kong Country series, the Kremlings likely had a civilization on DK Island hundreds, possibly even thousands of years ago. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in that series, but it's entirely possible that the ancient Kremlings were smarter and more advanced than their descendants. Not that that's a high bar or anything. So we've seen the ruins of their civilization on the island in DKC, and aside from the presence of the Naughties in the millstones, and arguably the rock crocs in one temple adjacent level, we didn't really get much of a look at the ancient Kremlings. If the world of Kremlantis follows the story of Atlantis, then it's very likely that the Kremlantians, yeah, I'm going with Kremlantians, were somewhat technologically advanced. Digging a bit deeper, it's possible that they lived here, and the ancient Kongs lived on the island, and when Kremlantis sank, the Kremlantians moved onto the island, setting into motion a chain of events that would culminate in a war between the clans and the Kremlings' eventual exile. It's also possible that Kremlantis could have been the source of their power. We're getting a bit silly here, but hear me out. The present day Kremlings are a far cry from the glory of their ancestors. They're disorganized, probably unhygienic, and incapable of thinking big picture. It could be that their mental and societal decline began with their exodus from the sinking Kremlantis and arrival on DK Island. As for what sunk Kremlantis, who's to say? I think, based off what we've already speculated about the Kremlings, their disregard for nature, their exploitation of natural resources, that sort of thing, it's not a stretch to say that the Kremlantians are responsible for the destruction of their own civilization. There's a lot more to this that we could dive into, especially when factoring in things like the Lost World and the altar from DKC2, but I think we should keep moving. Tricky Temple is the first level of Kremlantis, and it's a good way to ease the player into this new world. It's very linear, as most of these levels are, with very little in the way of obstacles, at least until you reach the pits at the end. It introduces Crusher, and it's the first appearance of the temple theme, which slightly remixes the assets of the Ruins tile set from DKC to appear more like we're inside the temple rather than outside. There's a shield and cutlasses decoration asset that's used throughout the level. It feels a bit stylistically inconsistent, but I'll give them points for trying. And if I felt generous, I'd say something like the cutlasses tie this game into the pirate theme of DKC2. Could be the default two-tone Game Boy look, but I feel like this temple tile set could be a slightly desaturated blue. Could be cool if there was an effect on the walls like light reflecting off of water, or maybe through a rainy window. As for a level theme, there's nothing in the gameplay that jumps out at me, so my money's on the temple theme being the main focus here. Depending on who you ask, this level is either called Kremlantis Chaos or simply Kremlantis. It's the first water level in the game, and it's an interesting one. If you're coming to Donkey Kong Land from DKC, you may have some, I guess, preconceived notions about what a water level is. In DKC, water levels had a degree of freedom that the others didn't, being able to progress in 4 different directions at any given time. Kremlantis Chaos, the first water level we've seen since DKC, looks a lot more like your standard non-water level. It's linear, progressing from left to right, with only minor inclines and declines throughout, and it's quite cramped to boot. The theme is likely just the new tile set, and the distinction of being the first water level. But in terms of gameplay, avoiding Fangfish, Flapper, and Gloop in these tight quarters seems to be it. It's a crash course in controlling the Kongs underwater, which in a way is a blessing in disguise. There's a secret exit in this level too, but I'm not sure what the difference is. This tile set is lighter than the land-based temple, which makes me think it might have a sandy color to it. If I had to guess, or hope, I feel like it would be a light blue color, so as not to differentiate it from the previous level too much. Reef Rampage is more like the water levels we're used to, though it is pretty straightforward itself. Most of it just goes left to right, then you descend a bit, go right to left, descend some more, and repeat. No new enemies appear, but the minces come back and are the main obstacle, especially towards the end. The focal point of the level is simply the tile set. We get a slightly remixed version of aquatic ambience here too. I feel like this level would look a lot more like Nautilus Chase, except maybe a bit darker. It could be cool if the background was more detailed too, like maybe the ruins of Kremlantis were visible behind the stage or something. The next level is called Snake Charmer's Challenge, which I think takes the cake for the worst level name in a Donkey Kong game. The focal point is obviously the snake baskets. They're essentially just the black drums from DKC, but the only enemy they burp out are slippers. One thing they do differently though is some of them will roll towards you. Snake Charmer's Challenge takes us back to the temple, though it feels more outdoorsy than Tricky Temple, due to the increased pits and pillars in the background. It's the first appearance of the new enemy/obstacle, Swirlwind, and the bonus area here is the first instance of the cloud tile set. But we'll talk about that more next episode. I feel like due to the more outdoorsy look of the level, Snake Charmer's Challenge could be palette swapped to a bluish green color. It'd be cool if one of the water effects I mentioned earlier was used here too. And maybe there's seaweed or something swaying in the background. I forgot to mention, there's a bomb barrel at the end of the level, which has to be used to unlock the 6th level, making the next level optional. Chumps Coliseum brings us back into the water, and reintroduces us to Chumps Jr., now called Chump for some reason. Maybe Chumps Jr. grew up between the two games, I don't know or care. Chumps Coliseum is very similar to Kremlantis Chaos, both in layout and gameplay. It's linear, going left to right with minor rises and falls, and the gist of the gameplay is simply avoiding the enemies. Despite being the owner and operator of said Coliseum, Chumps isn't actually in the level that much, nor is he the most difficult enemy to avoid. There's a bomb at the end of this level too, so if you went here before Snake Charmer's Challenge, you can skip that level if you want. I think it could be cool if the palette was cyan and purple, to match Chumps Jr.'s coloring. The next level, Nautilus Chase, is the hardest level in all of Kremlantis. That said, it's not like Rigging Rumble where the controls or the feel of the game make it frustrating and not fun. This level, despite being responsible for more of my deaths than any other in Kremlantis, is heaps of fun and actually feels like the centerpiece of the entire world to me. The main focus is the Nautilus, a new enemy that relentlessly chases you throughout the maze-like level. Unlike Nautilus Chase, you're not corralled, no pun intended, through tight, twisting pathways. In essence you are, sure, but these areas are much more open, often have multiple choices, or at least the illusion of choice, and with the tighter focus on the Kongs, makes it harder to tell where you're going. It can be a bit tricky, and sometimes a bit of trial and error is necessary, but it's never hard to the point of frustration. We are also introduced to the redesigned Clambo here, and it's one of the most difficult enemies in the entire level. I feel like this level's coral would be a dark, slightly desaturated purple against blue water. Again, it could be cool to see the temple in the background, or even pillars of light shining down through the surface of the water. We're back in the temple for the final level of Kremlantis. Swirlwind Storm's all about the swirlwinds, It's fairly easy and it's a fun level concept. The swirlwinds move towards you and will hurt you if you touch them, but if you jump on them, they throw you up in the air. Once you've landed on them, they'll follow beneath you, catching you after each jump. So at that point, they're more help than hindrance. That's pretty much it for Swirlwind Storm. On the Overworld map, it's the highest point of the temple, so maybe the visuals could reflect that somehow. Could be cool if the pillars of sunlight from the previous level made it here too. I feel like the color would be another blue, but possibly a different shade of blue from Tricky Temple. Or maybe the bricks are more of a sandy color, same as the ruins in DKC, but everything's got a blue tint over it, like we're looking at it underwater. The boss level's called Seab Showdown, where we square off with the second boss, known simply as Giant Clam. It's literally just Clambo from DKC with an upgraded moveset. It shoots pearls at you, and you've got to use what I assume is like a sea sponge or something to bounce them back at it. It's the first underwater boss in the history of Donkey Kong, and the last until the back end of Donkey Kong Country 3, so points there I guess. Another instance of Donkey Kong Land innovating and not getting its due credit. So that's the gameplay covered. Now let me see if I can piece together some kind of narrative here. The Kongs follow Wild Sting down into Kremlantis, finding a pocket of air in the temple. I'm sure the Kongs were surprised to find a sunken city so close to their home, and I'm sure they were even more surprised when they found Kremlings inside. They made their way through, and somehow figured that getting back into the water was the right course of action. I'm just gonna level with you all right now. Trying to figure out a cohesive narrative between the levels here is a bit of a stretch, even for me. So for part of this section, I'll be foregoing narrative to focus on the environmental detail, dropping in narrative elements when and where I can. For Kremlantis Chaos, it's kinda hard to figure out why they'd be going this way, especially when they end up back at the highest point of the temple at the end of the world anyway. Maybe they followed Wild Sting's path throughout, or maybe they were following the Trail of Bananas like in DKC. That last point has some merit to it, given the story behind the game, but honestly the answer is likely the same as it always is. It's a video game, don't question it. Kremlantis Chaos does have some interesting environmental detail though. If you look at the background, the pillars and stones are quite a bit larger than the ones found in Tricky Temple. Could be that we're in the city's cistern, or maybe the foundations of the temple itself, who knows. Moving away from the city, Reef Rampage is a linear, but nonetheless confusing path, folding in on itself as it goes deeper and deeper down. Maybe here, the Kongs lost the trail they were on. When they finally made it out into a sort of clearing, they saw two paths ahead of them, and another blocked by fallen rubble. Maybe a part of the Kremlantis ruins, fallen thousands of years ago. They can either return to the central temple, entering at a lower point, or go forward into another submerged section of ruins. The former was once the domain of some kind of snake charmer. Who they were or where they went is not for us to know, but their work was left behind here in the form of the snake jars. Maybe, long ago, the snake charmer was a Kremling that was instrumental in getting the Slippers to side with them against the Kongs. That's a bit out there, but whatever. The ladder takes the Kongs to Chumps Coliseum, where Chumps Jr., having grown up since their last encounter, has made his home. I've given it some thought, and could Chumps from DKC have died in between the two games? It would explain why Chumps Jr. now has his name. Maybe he fought him for it. At any rate, the Kongs find another bomb barrel, which they use to clear the rubble by the clearing. Here, they're chased through a labyrinth-like reef by the Nemos, a large and aggressively territorial Nautilus. Maybe the reef was sealed up for a reason. On the other side, the Kongs come out at the top of the central temple, where they're beset upon by the Swirlwinds, a sort of small, supernatural tornado thing. It's possible that whatever is responsible for sinking the city is connected to these tornadoes somehow. But from the highest point of the temple, the Kongs see a giant clam statue and head towards it. There, they're attacked by Giant Clam, the guardian of Kremlantis and second boss of the game. Obviously not ideal, but hey, at least they know they're on the right track. Not my best work, I know. Part 2 is over. For what it's worth, I don't actually think there's any sort of story here. I'm just piecing together what I can and extrapolating some kind of running narrative between the levels from it all. You could say that DKC is the same deal, and honestly, you'd probably be right, but I do believe that some of the stuff covered in Overthinking Donkey Kong Country is pretty on the money. Not all of it, but some of it for sure. I don't think there's any world building or narrative gold in Donkey Kong Land at all, but it's still fun to speculate, and it's a really solid experience that deserves more love, so I don't mind spending the time on it. I hope that love comes through in these videos. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 3.